Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
Today, there's a word for today because it is 2/21/2021. I can't remember what the
Yeah.
name of it is, but when
It's this
all
is
the numbers
basically
repeat,
it's a dyslexic nightmare.
it's 2021 and or February 21st, 2021. So our talk today is what if your burdens were gifts? We started thinking about that most of us in this teaching learn to speak our word and create the life we want, and we're always working on what we want to create, and that's fine, that's good, that's as it should be. But what about when we get things that we think we don't want, and how do we interpret that? But before we get into that, I would like to start with an opening prayer. It is written by Ernest Holmes, our founder, and it's called I Recognize the Indwelling Spirit. And the Bible quote is Psalms 46:10, one of my favorite statements. Be still and know that I am God. And Ernest says, a belief in the invisible is the very essence of faith. Prayer or spiritual communion demands a complete surrender to the invisible. It knows that because the creative power of God is at hand, all things are possible. Whatever our idea of God may be, the perception of reality is always an inner perception. As Moses tells us, the word is not afar off, but in our own mouths. And Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven is within us. The prayer of power is not so much a petition as it is an inner recognition. We cannot doubt that the Spirit has already made the gift of life since we live. Ours is the privilege of acceptance. Thus, we're aware, excuse me, thus we are to assume the attitude of a grateful beneficiary of the divine gifts. This should be done simply and directly. The Spirit is not something that was or that is going to be or become. The truth is that which is. It exists at the very center of our being. To pray in spirit and in truth means to recognize this indwelling spirit and to declare the truth about its activity through us. Today, I directly experience the reality of spirit, allowing it to renew my mind, guide my decisions, and direct my affairs. I know that in the eternal act of creation, everything passes from the invisible to the visible to be temporarily experienced. I rest in peace, assured that my needs are met by this play of life upon itself. And so it is. So I would like to suggest that this play of life upon itself would be very boring if all we experienced was comedies and romantic comedies and things like that. We have to have some downs with our ups, to have some drama, to have some experiences that we learn from, because we truly learn more from our hardships than we do from when we have the easy coasting time. So I wanted us to think of, because truly we give everything all the meaning that it has for us. Anything that happens, we give it the meaning. We give it the meaning that it was a good thing, it was a bad thing, that it meant this, that it meant that. It has no meaning on its own. We are the givers of the meaning. So we need to be careful about what meaning we give it. We might, if something bad happened to us, we might give it the meaning that it's unfair, that we are being punished. We don't know what we did wrong, but why me, God? And Bob, I thought this might be a good time for you to talk about your experience with words.
What was coming to mind when you were talking was a long time ago when I used to bicycle ride competitively. I would have to get in shape, And one of the ways that I would get in shape is I would do two things. I would put a backpack on my back and I would fill it with as many bricks as I could manage to carry. And then while I was riding, I would also whistle. So whistling would steal some of my breath, and the additional weight made it much more difficult to ride. And so I would ride and ride and ride and ride with all this extra weight. And you could say that the bricks were a burden, and they were a burden of choice. And the benefit of having that burden of choice was that when I took the bricks out of the backpack and went on a competitive ride, I felt like I had wings. And I think very often the burdens we have are teachers that will allow us to find our wings. And an example of that that Judith was mentioning is a long time ago, I was diagnosed with dyslexia, or as I call it, alexithsia. And, uh, and that meant that I had to really look carefully at words to understand them. I had to look at words to see their size, the feel of them. I had an odd relationship with words. And that odd relationship with words made me have to investigate them at you might even say, an intimate level. And so my exploration of words, my struggle with words has led me to writing. And who would have thought, especially my English teacher, that I would become a published author and have dyslexia? Also, I became a public speaker and I stuttered. And so overcoming,
Well, you didn't stutter as a public speaker.
no, no.
You stuttered and
So, so,
overcame it.
so sometimes, right. I stuttered badly. I had dyslexia. I couldn't read. And the teachers put me in a special class with kids who wore helmets. And it was not a pleasant sight. It was not a pleasant experience. Although I learned empathy and sympathy for the kids that were much worse off than I was, I learned how to examine words in a way that I never would have examined them, and to this day still do. There's on the way to Palm Beach. What is the
Oh, Hypoluxa,
yeah
Hypoluxa Boulevard.
right? And I saw it, and I knew immediately it was hypoxia. And because it was hypoxia, it was because it was a word that I knew, and I immediately associated the word that I knew with the word that I didn't know, rather than I had to take a second look at it. It's not hypoxia. I got my breath. I can breathe. And but this relationship with the problem has continuously enriched me without my even realizing it. And I think for a long time, I can remember thinking dyslexia, because I was told it was something that was not good to have, would be a burden I would have my entire life, and that it would always be a problem. And in fact, I was told earlier I probably shouldn't bother with high school, finishing it, or going to college. It wouldn't be worth it for me because of the learning problems that I had. So having a problem with learning,
Which you ignored.
yeah, clearly. And I did all of those things, and I just didn't tell anybody any longer that those were disabilities, or those were problems, or they were disorders, or whatever they were being named. But the problem we have is that very often when we have a difficulty, we have a burden, we name it, and then we carry it, and we don't recognize how much disruption it's creating because of the way we carry it. And we carry it as if somehow there's something wrong with us, rather than,
Right.
if this is something that's right with me, I wonder what I could do with it. And particularly, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but we saw a wonderful video, The Superhuman.
Oh, yes.
And in The Superhuman, this is what,
On Netflix.
on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, it's incredible. But
It's a documentary.
right, the example that I want to give you from this that was so astounding was they took children, and adults too, but children, blindfolded them. They had a heavy duty blindfold, and taught them to see without their eyes. That is, they could see with their consciousness, they could see with their brain. And you see these kids riding bicycles, skateboarding, and running courses blindfolded.
And reading books,
Yeah,
reading aloud, and we could see the words that they were reading, and they learned for their consciousness to see. They were not using their eyes, adults and
so
children.
you could say,
And one had been a blind person
yeah, well,
who said,
an older
man,
blind woman learned how to read with her consciousness and could see things that she wasn't able to see otherwise. But
it's amazing.
think about that, having eyes that see can blind us to our greater vision.
Yes.
And so some of the disabilities we have, or some of the things that we think are problems, can be assets. But the question I had that got this whole conversation started yesterday was what if the burdens that you feel were burdens that you said yes to? What if the burdens that you were experiencing were burdens you agreed to,
In
that you
spirit, in
in
spirit.
spirit, that you even invited into your life? What if this was what you asked for in order for you to be able to have the most profound and amazing experience called living? And even if that's not true, and I do believe it is, but even if it's not true, shifting your position from this is something that is being done to me to this is something that's an opportunity for me can change the field of experience enormously. Because when we're no longer a victim of the thing that we've been struggling
Exactly.
with, we become performers, we become advocates for our own being, we become living, breathing examples of success in ways that we never could have imagined.
Right. And I do believe that, and we've been studying the Seth book, Seth Speaks, and I believe he confirms that, before we come into this life, we have it all planned out along with our guides and helpers to what we want to experience and learn and do and be this life, including our children who will be our children are there in this planning too. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all that some things that we call deficits or challenges
Mhm.
were planned definitely in advance.
Yeah, and the example that came to mind when we were studying that the other day, which I can't get out of my mind, was imagine that you're in this dimension between here and the next dimension and another life, and you're sitting at a huge table, a beautiful table, and they hand out a bunch of scripts, and you get to read for this part, and yeah, I like this. I could do this part. And I think this is a good one. And then you come down to the physical world and you actually live that part. The only thing is you forget the script. But what if we scripted? What if we tried out for? What if we experimented with and said yes to the life that we're living rather than, I don't know why it's happening. This just stuff is always happening to me. And that position that I see people often take. Well, if something bad can happen, it'll happen to me. It always does. And that is so destructive at so many levels.
And because the word is not afar off, but in our own mouths, and as you
Yeah.
speak, so it is.
Imagine your immune system's listening to you saying, if shit happens, it's going to happen to me.
Mm.
Whoa. Your immune system, well, why are we even bothering?
Yeah.
So your whole body, but also on the other hand, have any of you ever been depressed and miserable and sad and upset and things weren't going well, and suddenly you met for that the love of your life, at least you knew it was going to be the love of your life, and for 48 hours you couldn't sleep and you lost weight like you wanted to and everything tasted good that you ate and life went on magnificently and people said, what's going on with you? I met somebody. Yeah, what you did is you met an idea in mind that so infused you with power and light and joy that you were transformed. If a single thought, the idea of being with the right person can transform you, is that the only thought that can? Or can all thinking transform, and does all thinking transform us in one way or another?
I would like to go back to that superhuman
Yeah.
documentary. The place where they taught people to do this blindfolded seeing was there were three places. One was in Utah, um,
Well,
and
there's not
two
much to
others
say. Yeah.
two others were in Europe.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly the locations in Europe, but so it's not doesn't belong to any one country. This thing, I think it began with our governments early doing remote viewing, having people who believe they had extra ESP, um, or seeing if they could describe a remote location and what was going on there. It was like psychic spying. But we knew the Russians were doing it, so we wanted to develop our own team to do it too. This is going back into the
Yeah.
60s and
Yeah.
70s, I think. And so they still did some experiments with teaching people remote viewing or experimenting with it to see what they could see. It was amazing how accurate they were, and the people themselves were supremely surprised that they could do this
Yeah.
because we just have more abilities than we know we have. We limit ourselves with our five senses, and say, without them, I can do nothing. But in fact, you have a consciousness that is far greater and far wiser, and it's bigger than your brain. It uses your brain, but it's not limited by your brain. So this is what was doing the seeing for these people that were totally blindfolded, totally in the black.
A number of years ago, for several years, I met with a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a nurse, and myself. We all met together once a week to explore alternative ways of viewing the universe and the world and consciousness. And I had the experience of having gone to a psychometrist, a person who could take an object, hold the object, and tell you things about yourself from the object. And I was so blown away with this that I told the group, and I said, well, why don't we try that? I said, yes, that would be wonderful. I said, well, why don't you try it? You're the one who experienced it. I said, what would I try? He said, well, I've hired a new secretary. The psychologist said, I'll take something of hers. You can hold it and tell me what you see. I thought, this is ridiculous, but I'll do it. So they got a watch that she had. I held it in my hand. I closed my eyes. And for 20 minutes, I went on and on and on and told this incredible story that I thought was amazing, ending with a kind of
And you thought you were making up.
oh yeah, I mean, it was all visual. I'm simply describing a dream that I'm having,
Uh-huh.
and I ended up with the car that she drove, which I thought was, definitely I thought I was right on that one. We brought her into the room. He just hired her. He didn't know her. We played back everything that I had told her. She was somewhat embarrassed because she was having an affair, and I knew that. And everything I said about her was accurate except for the car she drove.
Or did you impose your own
I
car?
think I have a car block. And so, but we all sat there looking at each other and saying, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So I didn't even think it was possible, but it was. See, we have the possibility of being so much more than we think. We live in impossibility. We live in the smallness of our smallest thoughts sometimes and wonder why we can't get bigger. And living in the smallest thought you have, there's just no room for you. And so seeing things like uh, this documentary is wonderful, not because it'll teach you something that you need to know, but because it opens the mind to, oh my God, if that's possible, what else is possible?
Exactly.
Why am I living so small?
As a matter of fact, I want to watch it again. But I'd like to go back to this idea about when our burdens are gifts.
Yeah,
We saw not long ago a documentary about an architect who, through illness, became blind.
actually, it was 60 Minutes.
It was 60
Yeah,
Minutes. And he, after going through suffering, I'm sure, he finally decided that as he was trying to make his way around with feeling a pole, that the buildings need to be redesigned to help people who are unsighted. And so his career now, you may have seen this on television, is designing public buildings to be better suited for people who have no sight. And when they ask him, so his career has just gone, he was already successful, but it really skyrocketed. And they asked him if he could have a sight, would he choose that? Instead, he said, oh no,
I wouldn't
uh,
go back.
I wouldn't go back. No, he said, this has been wonderful for me.
It,
So, this is a person who not just emotionally but physically manifested a better life through it. But many people suffer through some of these things and still don't have leave great gifts for our world.
he became a
And
real visionary.
yes, he did. And I looked up on the internet because I know mental illness can be something that people really feel, why me, and feel the suffering of it. And yet, and I know there's a whole slew of people and of historic figures that we assume were bipolar, but from their descriptions and diaries and things. So I wanted to share some of those with you. You know about Abraham Lincoln, I'm sure, who some of his friends referred to him as the most depressed person they had ever seen. And at least on one occasion, he was so overcome with melancholy that he collapsed. So here is the man we consider him our greatest president ever, and yet he had this burden to bear. And both his mother and numerous members of his father's family exhibited similar symptoms of severe depression. indicating that he was probably biologically susceptible to the illness. And his wife was very depressed too, so that must have been the law of attraction with the two of them. But look what gifts he gave us. I was surprised to learn that Ludwig von Beethoven, they think he probably was bipolar because he died of liver failure because he had been self-medicating with alcohol for decades. And sadly, much of what he may have suffered from probably could have been managed with today's medication. But his fits of mania were known in his circle of friends. When he was on a high, he could compose numerous works at once. And it was during his down periods that most of his celebrated works were written.
Hmm.
So sadly, that was also when he contemplated suicide, which he told his brothers in letters throughout his life. So you wonder if people like that, you know, might have willingly come into this life knowing and even perhaps choosing these so that their contributions could be greater. Michelangelo, they're wondering if Michelangelo was autistic.
I just thought he was artistic.
I thought he was artistic, but he may have been autistic. His single-mindedness may be due to the disorder. Um, let's see, let me find something interesting to say. Michelangelo seems to have had difficulty forming relationships with people. He had few friends. He didn't even attend his brother's funeral. All of this combined with his obvious genius in math and art led researchers to believe that today he would be considered high functioning on the autism spectrum. So maybe he chose that. Winston Churchill, they believe, was bipolar
I
and
think
is
Winston
known,
Churchill drank a little too.
drank a little, was known, yeah, drank a lot, was known he called it the dark dog of depression that he was always fighting. And then Isaac Newton, this really surprised me. He's considered one of the world's greatest scientists of all time. Uh, and historians agree he had a lot of going on in mental illness. He suffered from huge ups and downs in his moods, indicating bipolar disorder, combined with psychotic tendencies. His inability to connect with people could place him on the autism spectrum. He also had the tendency to write letters filled with mad delusions, which some medical historians feel strongly indicate schizophrenia. Whether he suffered from one or a combination of these serious illnesses, they did not stop him from inventing calculus, explaining gravity, building telescopes. He's considered the father of genetics, among many other things. So,
So imagine then that what you have been saying is wrong with you is what's right with you.
exactly.
And imagine that if you could take a step away from either of those positions and say, I don't know what it means, but it's an opportunity. You know, the downside of what we're reading here is that lots and lots of people have gotten all excited about being able to name a syndrome or
Right.
to put a name to it as if somehow that helps. But the truth is, we have what we have in all probability for good reason, and we can then work with that in a way that enriches and empowers and makes our lives better if we choose to. So
And,
what
and we might ask ourselves, what am I doing or achieving or accomplishing that I wouldn't have been able
because
to
of it,
if I didn't have this affliction, disorder,
right?
something you're judging?
Yeah, I suspect that a lot of my life wouldn't have been in service to humanity as much as it has been had I not needed to find some way to service myself,
Sure.
to service the things that I thought were wrong and problematic. And so I think it's really an opportunity for us to look at ourselves and say, wow, if I chose this, I must have really been something of an amazing person. I must be a lot more than I thought I was. And I think sometimes the burdens that we carry that are larger burdens have larger benefits. The payoffs can be enormous.
And sometimes just from suffering, the benefits we get are greater empathy, greater understanding, greater wisdom. Um, we all enjoy recounting our favorite times in life.
Yeah.
And yet the ones that grow us the most are the hard ones.
Well, we also love sharing the stories of almost having had this happen or almost dying from that or this and
Close
surviving.
calls.
Yeah.
Yeah, close
The
calls.
close calls and what we don't, we're not excited about the close call part. We're excited about the part, I made it. I got through this. And what did you learn from that? Or what happened to you because of it? I have somebody that I know recently who got hit by a car and it woke her up. And, so who would have thought that getting hit by a car would be a wake up call to maybe I need to do more to keep a
Maybe
better,
maybe I am glad to be
yeah,
alive.
maybe I need to find a better mental footing and,
Ah,
and become a little more visible. So,
true, true.
so we're going to move now because we're running out of time. We're going to move to the music section that we've selected for today's uh, program, and this is you call this our offertory music.
Yes.
And so what that means is that all the time that you're listening to this, you're thinking about, God, I've got thousands of dollars I'd love to donate to this center, but I'll donate a reasonable amount. And so think about the donation that you'd like to make or can make or are making. If you're, for those of you, and I think we're being well supported now by the people that are here, thank you for your support and for your encouragement and for helping us stay live.
And we're going to play this YouTube of Andra Day singing Rise Up. And after that, I'll do a screen